just the occasional climate protest of people linking arms in the middle of a highway or throwing soup on famous paintings, I haven't heard much from the radical climate movement lately. It seems like they may be focused on some other fights, unrelated to the climate movement, of course. So our world overheating just has to take a back seat, I guess. However, the one notable conversation I've heard recently was one between Joe Rogan and Bernie Sanders, which is where I want to start this episode, but that is not where this will end. So first of all, this is just a little clip from that interview. So they're starting to talk a little bit about the climate here. Now, obviously, Joe Rogan is not some anti-climate denier, I don't know, whatever names they call people. He's just sort of, again, in the middle, wants to hear the truth, wants to get to the truth. A good way to have conversations, and this is a conversation that he had with Bernie.
The Earth's temperature has never been static, right? We could both agree on that. It's always been up and down. There's been ice ages and heat waves. And then the Washington Post looked at it. What was the time period that they looked at? That essentially they found that we're in a cooling period. That the Earth over the past X amount of years, and this was like a very inconvenient discovery, but they had to report the data, and kudos to them for doing that. Scientists have captured the Earth's climate change over the last 485 million years. Here's a surprising place we stand now. So look at the far end of that graph, and you see we're in a cooling period.
Well, I'm not sure. I didn't read that article, but
yeah.
The scientists who are out there, I think.
I know, but there's a lot of money involved in that too, Bernie. That's part of the problem.
That everyone, please go watch that interview. It is really funny. But that in particular was a great point where Bernie's like, well, I don't know about that.
Well, I'm not sure.
Just because you didn't yet read that article doesn't mean that it's not true. That's something he should know, especially if he is simultaneously helping to raise up a generation of kids terrified about a future due to climate change, or not having kids due to climate change, or living in fear and having anxiety every single day due to this. In stark contrast to what I've grown accustomed to seeing within that movement, one young woman named Lucy popped up on my TikTok feed recently, and she helped get AOC elected. She was an influencer for the climate movement, but then she grew up a bit, became a mom, experienced 2020 and all that came with that, and completely and utterly changed her mind. Now she's documenting her wild transformation in a recent TikTok series, one where every episode starts like this.
Day 31 of explaining why, as a former climate activist, I now think the climate movement is a scam. So we are in a heat wave here in New England and most of the country. So inevitably, you're going to start to see the climate change narrative about how, this is the hottest time ever on record. And there's going to be a lot of hysteria. And so I just want to give you some stats that will equip you with more information so you don't fall into the hysteria and the fear and anxiety that comes when there is extreme weather.
A hysteria that many people experience constantly because of this.
So first of all, this chart is just helpful to realize that while we see this on the singular right side right here, we see just average temperatures and how they've slightly gone up over the last 150 years. On the left here is the temperature range, right? And so what you're seeing is that every year we have extreme highs and we have extreme lows, and those are always happening. So don't buy into this idea that, this extreme heat we're experiencing now is like so unprecedented. There's always extremes going back through time. That's how weather works. And another thing I want to show you is this other chart, which shows that actually the worst heat waves we've ever had on record are from the 1930s. And this was the time of the Dust Bowl, and it was really, really bad.
I mean, charts can be manipulated so easily, and that's what's so dangerous, especially when you are focusing so much of a movement on one particular or two particular charts that can be manipulated, like the classic hockey puck one that is completely manipulated to appear a certain way. You scale out, and suddenly charts look much different. Or you scale in, and they look much scarier. I mean, that is a very real thing. And that is why these conversations are important to have and to debate and to discuss and to make sure that we're not putting all of our eggs in the wrong basket. Now, obviously, that was day 31, and there are many more where that came from. I would recommend going and watching her entire series. I'm going to play a couple of them, just some ones that stood out to me, but they are very insightful. Again, especially coming from someone who was so deep in that movement, so deep, and now she's completely on the other side, but still cares about the environment, but just is not buying the certain things that they were trying to sell.
There's a huge focus on superficial things that are not actually going to make a dent in protecting the environment, but become sort of sacred. So for example, having compostable plastic, that becomes you must have compostable plastic at events, even though I've gone to events with huge nonprofits environmental nonprofits where they have things like compostable plastic and there is no composting, and at the end of the event, it literally just goes in the trash.
You mean some of it's just performance? Just a bit of a show? You don't say. I love how she's just calling out. Like, yeah, they literally just threw it in the trash. It looks good for the party, and then after hours, they're like, don't care where it goes. Even composting as a whole. Yeah, okay, this one guy said, I work for a trash company, and it blows people's minds every time I tell them that basically none of the recycling is ending up in an actual recycling facility. That's also a thing with recycling. Like, let's have those conversations. Let's figure that out, and not just pretending like what we're doing is actually fixing anything when it's not. Coming up with composting plastic. And then even compost sites, there either aren't many of them or they don't even want to receive composting plastic because it composts at a slower rate than all of the other food that is at those centers. So it's so funny to me how like even those places don't want the composting, but no one ever talks about that. We just move right along. We just use our little composting plastic and look, we just saved the world. I mean, it's exhausting. Speaking of being less wasteful, I used to use razors that I would just like use a couple times and throw them away. That was like the norm. But since I switched to Jeremy's razors, I literally have the same handle that I've been using for several months at this point, and then eventually I just swap out the blades. Because they send you refills, so you don't have to keep just buying the little junky ones that you just throw out every day because they're just garbage. So if you want to try Jeremy's razors, they have 5 stainless steel blades that destroy stubble. They also offer a precision trimmer for clean lines and tight corners. Plus, Jeremy's razors is also offering hair and body care essentials made without sulfates and parabens. And in honor of Independence Day, you can get 25% off. Just head to jeremy'srazors.com. That is jeremy'srazors.com today. Get a good quality razor, and then you can do your little part to stop spending and wasting on little junk throwaway razors. See, I'm doing my part. I'm trying. Okay, there's so many good ones. I was struggling to pick which ones. I mean, again, this girl, she's just on it. Every single one, I was so locked into the series.
So one of the big red flags about the climate movement is that they do not like nuclear energy or natural gas, which are 2 great sources of energy that lower emissions and are reliable, can run 24/7. But no, the climate movement hates natural gas and nuclear. Not only do they hate nuclear, they actively shut down nuclear power plants. This is happening in places like California. It's happened in New York, happens in Germany a lot. And that makes no sense. Like, the climate movement should support nuclear energy because it is 0 emissions and it's so in line with what they claim their goals are.
She kept seeing more and more times where things just didn't make sense. Where as she learned more information and then she put it against her own ideology and thought, well, that doesn't track. If they truly care about the environment, why don't they like that as well? I love watching critical thinkers think. One person on that video said, we need to have this conversation for real. I mean, there are important conversations to have. Iron out all the details, iron out where they go wrong and where they go right, and like fight that, figure out that. But don't just shut it down altogether.
Day 32 of explaining why, as a former climate activist, I now think the climate movement is a scam. I was part of the climate movement for many, many years before I realized just how privileged I was to even care about the environment. Because many people in the world, most people who are not living in developed Western countries, don't have the time or capacity to care about the environment because they're just surviving. And the thing that has made us in the West so rich, have had so much prosperity, so much abundance, is fossil fuels, okay? That's the irony. The thing that we protest in the climate movement is the thing that has made our society so rich. There are places in sub-Saharan Africa right now that still use animal dung and wood to fuel fires, to cook their food and boil water. They don't have time to protest the environment. And frankly, if I had it my way, I would be making it easier for those countries, the areas in sub-Saharan Africa that are still cooking with dung. I want those people to have access to fossil fuels because it's the single biggest thing that you can do for society to bring people out of poverty. And no one in the climate movement wants to talk about this fact. It is a fact. Come for me. It's a fact.
People don't want to have complex conversations. It's so evident. One person said, I realized this in the 80s when it went from global cooling to warming. And we went from paper bags to plastic bags to save the planet. I haven't blindly trusted the science since. That is actually crazy that they switched from paper bags to plastic bags. Every year it's something different. When I was in elementary school, and my sister was 2 grades older than me, she had to watch like a documentary about global warming and how Florida was going to be underwater. And my aunt and uncle live in Florida. And so she got so scared. She freaked out to my parents being like, our aunt and uncle are going to pass away because they live in Florida. But that's what was being taught. That's a crazy thing to think about. And that was 15 years ago. How the times keep changing, how the fears keep changing. My poor sister. That was like such a big thing. My parents had to like talk and be like, no, this is not true. Like, this is...
That's horrible.
By the time I got around to that class, if my memory serves me right, there was permission slips. So a parent had to sign and approve that we were allowed to watch the global warming stuff. I mean, like, isn't that crazy?
How old were you?
I was probably like 2nd or 3rd grade.
That's crazy.
And I need to remember, I don't think my dad signed it. I think he was so angry when my sister went through that, and he's like, no. He just gave me a little science lesson on global warming and being like... But it was this video that she filmed that I thought was very telling.
So I'm watching these protests right now in LA, and it's really making me think about the climate movement and how the movement from the time that I was in it evolved from being about climate and environment to really being anti-Western, anti-capitalism, and really anti-anything American. I remember being in the movement and fully being indoctrinated into this worldview that America was evil, that capitalism was evil, and basically those two things were the center of like all evil in the world. And the climate movement somehow had to fight not just like, you know, putting up more wind turbines or whatever, or lowering our carbon footprint, but we had to fight American imperialism and capitalism and basically everything that the West stands for.
All these movements or protest groups, regardless of who they are, the roots come back to that. So they're just somehow feeding all these people to just be so against their own country. It is like terrifying in the power that it has and the effectiveness that it has. But man, like, does that not mean something? Is there not something else going on if all these movements, when you get to the core of them, are trying to train people to be anti-Western, anti-capitalist, all the things that are what make America distinct and great?
It's such a destructive mindset. And almost when I was part of that, I feel like I was like in a mental prison because I was taught that as a white, privileged woman from America, like I was evil. And I was so afraid to ever speak out and voice any of my differences of opinions because I knew like I would be the first on the cross to be sacrificed by this movement because I was a privileged person. And again, this ideology that the West is bad, America's bad, capitalism is bad, I obviously now do not think that. I think America's amazing. I think capitalism has been so transformative in lifting billions of people out of poverty and creating the dynamic lives that we're able to have.
She's had such a transformation. This is wild.
I'm so grateful for my life as a privileged American living with capitalism. But when I was in the climate movement, I had so much guilt, so much shame, and I thought that basically where I was from was evil, and I had to atone for my sins by becoming part of this movement.
It's heartbreaking to see because you know that sometimes there are good hearts at the core of some of this. Their sympathy and their empathy is just taken and completely radicalized into this indoctrination. It's not fair even to them. Using words like, you know, she was full of guilt, full of shame. Those are not good fruits. If there is a movement that is producing those things, it is not a good, honest movement. I mean, spiritually, I know that those words are not of goodness. You know, they're not coming from a good source. You hear more oftentimes not that they feel that, but also they show that. Their anger, there's something else there. It's not a road that's going to lead to joy and fulfillment, and also it's not a road that's helping as much as they think that it is. If anything, at one point, she literally said that she thinks that overall it's making it worse, not better.
Now that I'm outside of the climate movement, I genuinely believe that the climate movement and activists in the climate movement have not done anything positive for humanity and prosperity and like our civilization. I feel like they're just destroyers and complainers who are pushing these solutions that don't even work. And I think the real heroes for the environment that we see in our society are like the engineers who work at companies and work in industry and are trying to make their products more efficient or figure out a more environmentally friendly way to drill oil or making a more efficient light bulb or all those things. Like those are the people who are doing more for the environment than the climate activists who are throwing, you know, paint, tomato soup on paintings.
Yeah, there are good people out there who care about the environment, who are out there in certain fields working to make it better. Those are the true, like, climate heroes in a sense. The activists who just go everywhere and just protest, but are not actually helping, are not finding solutions. That's who she's talking about here, and that makes sense.
One story for me that really like put this into relief for me was back when I was still covering the climate as a climate like influencer reporter. I went to an event for this like recycling startup, and I was talking to engineers from P&G. And I had a bias going into this conversation with this engineer from P&G that like, oh, he works for a big corporation, like he's evil. Again, like not smart. And I'm talking to this guy and I was like, wow, isn't it great that you're finally like doing something and considering the environment in your work? And he goes, we always consider the environment in our work. We always consider the environment in how we engineer. We're always thinking about how to make things more efficient and to use less, material when we make our products. And he's like, we always think about that. And in that moment, I was like, wait, of course you do. Like, you're an engineer. Like, being better for the environment, making maybe a lighter weight product to hold our dish soap or whatever, that saves the company money. It's less material that they have to buy. It's cheaper to ship because it's lighter, right? And like, I had this holier than now perspective and worldview that because I was on the climate side, the climate activist side of this movement, that I was better than these engineers who actually work every single day to make changes that actually make a difference. What do the activists do? They complain, they block traffic, they throw paint on paintings, and they do not do anything good for civilization. I will die on this hill that the climate movement has done less for humanity and actually probably has caused more destruction for humanity than any of these amazing industries that are trying to make our lives better by creating products that are good that we want to buy and we want to use.
There are ways to help the cause. There are ways to actually help the environment, to go into fields, to become an engineer, to become these things where you will have an impact and your say will matter, and not just sitting in the middle of the street protesting and literally doing nothing. Also sitting in the middle of the street, people are just burning their gas. They're sitting there just parked, wasting more gas. That's the hypocrisy. That's why it constantly is like, you're not even helping yourselves. At one point, people were starting to get mad because she was saying this of her own free will. And so people were like, who's bankrolling you? What corporation is paying you to say all this? And she's like, literally no one.
No one has paid me to make any of the videos that I've made on my page in these past 2 weeks. And I think that this comment is so indicative of the climate movement and why people stay in that mindset. And it's because anyone who speaks differently, they're paid off. They're misinformation, they're spewing misinformation, they're conspiracy theorists. There's all these tactics that the movement uses to keep you thinking inside the movement's paradigm. And anyone who goes outside of it is like a hack, a sellout, they're getting paid off. I think it's just another brainwashing tactic that not only the climate movement uses, we can see it with any movement that keeps a group thinking in a certain way.
There are no lengths to which people won't go to avoid the hard work of thinking. People hate on you because you think for yourself. Oof, that's a good line. We're being fed two separate realities is what it is. That too. When you talk to people on the other side, we're like, oh, we're in completely different paradigms existing. And that's such a scary place to be in for society. How do you make progress? How do you come to agreements and discussions when you're living in literally different worlds? That's why more people like her, and let's just talk. Let's just air it out. Let's figure out what the other person thinks and then have a conversation. A lot of people in the comments just thanking her. Thank you for waking up. I had this realization too. Thank you for sharing about it. Talking about big solar and how there's monetary incentives everywhere. So it's not just one is this angel thing and the other ones are, it's wind turbines. I should go down that rabbit hole. That's a whole thing. You can't just throw them away when they break because eventually they break. They last for 5 or 10 years and then they're done. And then you have this literal building that just has to be brought down. People die all the time, them getting built. I mean, they're super dangerous, crazy dangerous. There's so many elements of environmentalism that's just kind of being okay, well, it's wind. But it's not that simple. That's the thing. Nothing's ever that simple. I mean, there's good and bad with a lot of these things. And that's kind of the nature of it. Not one is this perfect saint. One woman said, climate activism has actively set back the public opinion on the actual environmentalists and climate issues. And Lucy agreed. She's like, yes, yes. As I was saying, that is what's happening, unfortunately. Living in Washington State, when you go towards Seattle, where all the activism goes, it's just all full of trash, streets covered in feces, garbage needles, horrible for local animals. Just driving out of the metro area, everything gets cleaner, usually means less activists. What does that say about the movement? The irony there is not lost, especially not lost on conservatives. That's what we're saying. We're seeing that. And so we're there has to be another way. Another person said, you are going through a natural progression. As you age and life continues to kick you in the face, and as you see the blatant hypocrisy from those that seek to control, your views will become more conservative. It's really cool to hear you say this. Hence why MAHA and environmental issues are becoming more of a conservative thing all of a sudden, because we too want to live in a safe, healthy, beautiful country. Healthy with our food, but also to ensure a safe and healthy environment. Even RFK Jr. has spent a large part of his career fighting environmental issues too. But again, they just love to jump and hate on him all of a sudden, even though he was actually helping certain things, especially at a corporate level, for a very long time. Even on a small scale, that's why us crunchy people are all going for the glass mason jars and just glass, using that instead of plastics, and also trying to eliminate the microplastics that are in our clothing, our food, literally everywhere, and also trying to reduce fast fashion. Like, those are things that I'm seeing on the conservative movement a lot right now because it's good for society, it's good for our environment, and it's good for ourselves. It's encouraging to see people actually finding practical solutions to real problems that they actually have the ability to help with, rather than just yelling into a void that seems hopeless and then just festering that anger and that sadness and that anxiety. Also, the whole thing about, homesteading and trying to having your own chickens because it's just natural compost. Like, you just take your food out and your chickens eat it. Starting to grow gardens, like that's also environmentalism in a beautiful way. That's using your environment to be fruitful and to multiply the food, but also just keep you healthy. I mean, why is that becoming a conservative thing? It's not that one party hates the environment and one party loves it. That's not true. Even some of the people that are out there and, they work in national parks, they're conservatives, they just love the environment and they care about it. But they don't care about sitting in the middle of the street protesting something that doesn't even make sense. There's a way to do this effectively and there's a way to not do it effectively. And what this girl is saying, she was in that cult-like thinking for years. And now it sounds like she wants to find a way to do things that will help her environment, but that will do it in a way that is actually helpful and is not just harming society as a whole and pulling everyone backwards. Another woman said, I look forward to your continued growth, not because you've come to the other side, but because I feel like you might be more objective now on issues because you've been on both sides. Looking forward to more content from you. Another girl said, I'm fascinated by this series. I mean, truly, it was so eye-opening. Again, I encourage you to watch the whole thing because I've just pulled a few pieces of her multi-week series at this point. There are absolutely worthwhile conversations to be had here, especially with those who are passionate about our environment. It will take those who are willing to break out of the mold and encourage real conversation and debate rather than blind groupthink that will truly be the things moving us forward. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. If you want more content like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel and like this video if you enjoyed it. For other content, you can also follow me on Instagram and X, as well as our brand new comment section Instagram. I'll see you guys in the next episode.